Hello, YouTube. I want to explain a mechanic that I think is a bit obvious, but apparently people sometimes get trapped up with it. And I can see some confusion coming from it, and that's critical strike chance. So there's a few things I want to look at of crit chance to explain the mechanic. For starters, how do you calculate the damage of crit chance? How do you calculate the base crit? And then how do you calculate additional crit damage? So if you look at my build here, right, you can clearly see I have 857% critical strike rating, and I have 76% crit chance. How do you take this 857% crit chance to get 76%? Because that's just confusing. How do you do that? So just baseline, the assumption you should make, just baseline. Sorry, give me a second. So just baseline. Every if you're playing attack build or playing a spell build, you're gonna have a baseline of 500 crit rating. Why? That is just how your weapon works. If you have a weapon in this game for any base, it doesn't matter what base you look at, it is going to have 500 critical strike rating. This 500 critical strike rating that every weapon has is the base crit. So first up, how does this work with dual wielding? Let's say you're a caster, has to work with dual wielding. It is simply just going to take your main hand's crit rating. It's not going to bother with your offhand. If you're dual wielding with melee weapons, it's going to alternate the crit rating depending on which weapon is attacking. If you use your main hand, it's going to use your main hand's crit rating. If you use your offhand, it's going to use your offhand crit rating. If you use something like join forces, which makes it only your main hand participates in attacks, it is going to completely ignore your offhand's critical rating. And this happens for everything, okay? Now, you can see it here with wands, but, because wands don't have, base crit rating, but spells, as a whole, have a base crit rating of 500. I'm not actually sure if it's placed anywhere or said anywhere, but even if it's, not said on the spell directly, that is just a thing that spells have a base crit rating of 500 as well, okay? So, the ways that you can get yourself to 100% crit is through one, the obvious one of scanning crit rating. But I already explained to you that spells have a base crit rating of 500, right? So if you have 500 crit rating and you need to get 10,000 crit, 10,000 crit points to get to 100% crit, okay? How the fuck do you do this? Because the only way to get to 10,000 points would be to have 2,000 crit rating. Or 2,000% crit rating. Because this number is getting this 500 number is getting multiplied by this number divided by 100. So if you have 500 critical strike rating on your weapon or on your spell, and you have 200% crit, 200% crit, it is just going to be 2 times 500, which is going to give you 10% crit. So how are you getting to 10,000 crit to get a 100% crit chance? So the first way, and something that the reason why I couldn't even show it with my weapon or anything, is attack gear crit rating or spell crit rating. So for both attack-based builds and for spell-based builds, you have a modifier that you can actually roll on your gear, which increases the critical strike rating of your gear. So instead of having only 500 base crit, my pistol is instead giving me 795 base crit. So instead of needing 2,000% crit rating to get to crit cap, it's a much more accessible number of 1,258% crit. Okay? You know, getting 1,258 crit is a lot more accessible than trying to get 2,000. Generally, your goal is always going to be to get this number to be in the, 1,000 to 1,300% range before it starts becoming inaccessible. And similarly, if you play like a spellcaster, for example, you can just get that as a modifier on your wand. It is an advanced suffix. That's a sequence, not a suffix. This one, plus 116 spell critical strike rating. It doesn't have a percentage on it. This is just raw crit rating. This is just adding to your 500 base crit rating. And so something to note is that if you're dual wielding, so you have a sword and a sword, if you have attack crit rating on your main hand weapon and on your offhand weapon, those crit ratings are separate. Your crit is going to be calculated depending on which weapon is attacking. If you have joined forces, your offense crit rating does nothing, it is that stat. Okay? That being said though, if you're playing a spell-based build, you can actually get crit rating on both your main hand and your offhand, because both are being added to just the base crit rating of your wand. So, with all of that being said, how do we put this together? Well, if you look at my build, you're going to see that I have 76% crit chance, I have 857% crit rating, and I have a base crit of 795. Okay, so what is that? Well, our base crit is 795. Our crit rating is 857%. So we just do this times this, and we get 6,813 crit rating, which is not correct. Oh, I understand why. Sorry, this is something that I completely forgot about. Your attack critical strike rating, this number, the way you're going to calculate, or the way that you're going to do it, is this number is your base crit rating, okay? So it's like your critical strike rating. So this is all your forms of additional critical strike percentage. But baseline, your character always has 100% crit chance. Like 100% baseline critical strike chance. So if this number is 0, that doesn't mean you'll never crit, because you always have your baseline 500 base crit. So this number should actually be 100 plus 857. And then that's going to be percentage of 957%, which is essentially the same as saying 9.57x multiplier. Okay? So that's where we're getting this 975% number from. And then you're going to see 7608.15. My crit rating is 76.08. So this is the exact amount of crit I have. This is exactly how you calculate it. If I were to get more crit rating, let's say I get, another 200% crit, then all of a sudden I have 92% crit. So that's the first step. That's where the fuck this number's coming from. That's how the game calculates it. Also, I don't think I'm gonna find like a place to put it to mention it if I move on now, so I'm just gonna mention this now here. If you do have a Fire Magus, where is the Fire Magus? If you have a Fire Magus, the Fire Magus adds base critical strike rating to your character. The crit you get from Fire Magus is base crit rating. It is not percent crit or anything like that, which is why the Fire Magus is extremely powerful in spell builds to try and cap your crit out. Okay. That aside, oh yeah, and also another concept I want to talk about quickly is Lucky Crit. I don't actually know an item that has Lucky Crit on it off the top of my head. Oh, I know, Fluke. So something else you might encounter in this game is Lucky Crit. The way Lucky Crit works in this game is the concept of lucky. Normally in games, what it means is if it's a random outcome, it'll roll the random outcome twice and then take the best result of the two. It does not work that way in Torchlight. Instead, it just calculates what the chance of lucky would have been if it was to roll twice, and just gives you a flat crit amount. So, like, let's say we have 76% crit like this. So this is 76.08% crit, okay? If I were to add lucky crit to my build, it would roll the chance of me not hitting which is 0.2392, and it would roll that number twice, which is 0.057, so we'd minus this by 1. So if I were to equip Lucky Crit, the game wouldn't do any sort of calculations. It would just put me at 94.27% crit. There's no calculation being done by the game. There's no rolling your RNG twice or anything like that. It just gives you a flat amount of crit based off of your non-lucky amount of crit. It is a weird mechanic in the game, but that's just how it works. Lucky crit is not actually lucky, it is just flat crit rating, which is quite convenient. I think it's quite powerful. And that's also something that you can keep in mind. Okay, but no, we yapped all this about crit rating and how to figure out your crit chance and stuff. How do I calculate my damage of crit versus non-crit? Assuming that assuming that I don't have 100% crit. It's going to be a very simple calculation, okay? The way we're going to calculate it is like this. We're going to have one calculator be the chance of when we don't crit, and one be when we do crit. So if you don't crit, you just do 1. Every time you don't crit, your damage is just 1. If you hit for 500, you hit for 500. But let's say you do crit. What is your damage then? Well, your damage is going to be 1 plus your crit damage multiplier. So in this case, we have 735% attack crit damage multiplier. So this is a percentage, 735%. I am going to convert this to a number. You convert a percentage to a number by just doing times 100. Actually, I mean, I guess technically divide by 100. You divide by 100, then you get a number, okay? So it's going to be 1 plus 7.35. So if I don't crit, I'm doing only like, I'm just doing 1. I'm just doing whatever my damage is. If I do crit, I'm doing 8.35 times my damage. Now, I have a crit chance of 76.08%. So, I'm going to get this 8.35 times damage 7608% of the time. And I'm going to be getting this one number 2392% of the time. 23.92% of the time. So then we're going to get these two numbers, and we're just going to add them together. And this is how much damage I'm getting from my crit rating and crit damage right now. Okay? So with 76% crit chance and 735% critical strike damage, I'm doing 6.59x damage. Now, if I were to, actually put that into a number perspective, the calculation would look something like this. Where the first thing we want to do is we want to change this into a number that's usable. So this is like our flat crit chance. And then we're going to have 1 minus this number, because it's now for non-crit, multiply by just 1, because this is a non-crit. And we're going to add that together with this number, because this is when we do have a crit, multiplied by crit chance, which I don't have yet. And then we're going to have our function. So our crit damage is 735%. So this is going to be the same logic as here, where it is 100, because you always just have 100 base crit damage. It wouldn't make sense if you just don't crit damage. Oh, it actually... baseline crit damage is not 100%. Baseline crit damage is only 50%. So this is actually 50. That's just a mistake from me. So we're just gonna have 50 plus 735. So this number is gonna be 785 divided by 100 to get 7.85 as the multiplier. And then my aggregated crit damage is gonna be 522. Now this is not a usable number for us because we want to know how much is like X damage. So we're gonna divide it by 100. Ooh. Let's see. I messed up my brackets. And what we're gonna get is, on average, I'm gonna be doing 5.22x times damage whenever I get a critical strike chance. Or like whenever I hit a land. Whenever I attack, on average, I'm doing 5.2x damage thanks to my crit. Now, let's say we were to, just up the numbers a bit. Instead of having 957% crit chance, we instead add another 200%. All of a sudden, we're now doing 6.3x damage. And let's say we just had flat out 100% damage. Oh. I forgot to divide this by 100. Oh my god. Oh my god. Everything's falling apart. Everything's falling apart. Everything's falling apart. Everything's falling apart. This shouldn't be 100. This is my crit chance, so it should be 1. And then we don't divide it by 100. Oh my god, everything was stupid. Okay. Sorry about that. I completely messed up. This number from the get-go should have been a percentage number. Because you don't have 676 crit, you have 76% crit. And I just messed up completely. So if you go back to the original value of 76.08, and we make it a percentage, we would have 6.2x damage. If we then up it to 91.98% crit, we have 7.3x damage. And if we eventually reach 100% crit, we have 7.85 damage, which is just our critical strike damage plus the 50% more baseline crit. Because crits in this game, just baseline, have 50% more damage. Okay, sorry about that bit of a slip-up. But with all of that in mind, how do we then incorporate additional critical strike damage into all of this? Well, that's going to be very easy. Let's go back to our 76.02. So this is 957% crit. So we're doing 6.2x damage. But I have a mod on my build that makes you do 10% more damage from my critical strike chance. So if you look at the brackets, this first bracket here is explaining my damage when I don't crit. My additional crit does not matter for this. This number is not going to change with additional crit chance, but this bracket right here, this one is going to be affected if we get more crit chance. Because not only do we have a baseline crit, but then on top of the baseline crit, we also have an additional multiplier of 1.1% for 10% more crit. Maybe you have another form. Maybe you have a second. Maybe you have a second spot of crit. Sorry, a second form of additional crit, which is going to be 1.15%. Whatever it is that your build has. I think a good example of that would be God of Might, Judgment. If you have Judgment, you have 25% additional critical strike damage against paralyzed enemies. So how would I apply Judgment? I would just say 1 times 1.25, because the 25% additional crit damage is being applied to the critical strike multiplier. Okay? And let's say on top of that, we also have mark. I'm not sure actually if I have mark in this build. I don't think I do. But let's say you have a slate that gives you mark effect, like this ranger slate, which gives you 25% chance to mark enemies, which makes them take 10% additional critical strike damage and 30% mark effect. This essentially is just 12% additional critical strike damage taken. So then, along with our paralyze, which is making them take 25% additional crit damage, we're also going to have another 12% from our mark. And that's just how you calculate additional crit. I hope this video wasn't too technical. I tried to make my videos like a lot easier to follow around with. This one was a bit more math heavy than I normally like it to be. But I wasn't really sure on like a good way to explain crit to people that isn't just math, because it is very much just this very simple mechanic. It doesn't have a lot of complexity to it. It's just a few like very basic formulas. With that being said though, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a lovely day further. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and all those beautiful things. And I'll see you all again next time. Bye YouTube. Bye bye.